Are there ETs walking among humans today?
Once we detonated the first atomic bomb, these civilizations went on high alert that these chimpanzees, known as humans, that had evolved to the point of having enough intellect to extinguish all life on Earth. And so we basically kicked a hornet's nest.
Who is keeping it secret?
Kennedy was the last president to make a serious effort to correct that, and that got him killed, 100%.
What would be the most shocking thing that you could disclose in this conversation?
Humans have a choice to make, and we better make it in the next 18 to 24 months.
Dr. Stephen Greer, thank you for being here.
Very good. Nice to meet you again.
Yeah, man. Dr. Greer, how long in Earth's history, from your perspective, have extraterrestrials been visiting this planet? Why has it been kept secret, and who is keeping it secret?
These various civilizations have been visiting the Earth since before Homo sapiens were here. So in other words, they predate Homo sapiens, humans. And they were of two types. One were ones that were hundreds of thousands of years old that were non-human in origin and were the remnants of visitations going back before recorded history. And the others were of civilizations on Earth that were early human-like civilizations, not extraterrestrial, that were more advanced than we are now, for which we have virtually no record, because we have very little information before about 5 to 10,000 years ago. So there's a lot in there. Now, when you ask about secrecy, this is a recent phenomenon. Once, it was determined by the national security state, and this would have been in the late 1800s, that there were such objects around. This is the Great Airship Scare and other things of the late 1890s. It was determined that this is something of great interest to military and technological interests, where there had been some retrieval of either the bodies or craft of these objects. And of course, the history of that's very much lost. I do know that there are top secret files that are so-called above top secret that date from the late 1800s and early 20th century on UFOs and the extraterrestrial issue. So this then, the really big era of secrecy kicked in the 40s and 50s. And that was because once we detonated the first atomic bomb, a big red flag went over the Earth and over humans. And basically what happened is that these civilizations went on high alert that these chimpanzees, known as humans, that had evolved to the point of having enough intellect, just enough intellect. The fact is that when you cross the nuclear threshold, you have, even for the last 60 years plus, have the ability to extinguish all life on Earth. It's called mutually assured destruction. So in other words, this is something of great concern. So we basically kicked a hornet's nest. And even though these civilizations are decidedly non-hostile, or they would have cleaned our clock in August of 1945, precisely 80 years ago, it would have been all over but the shouting, my friend. They're decidedly not hostile, but they are not happy with the path that we've taken over the last 80 years. Roswell, as it turns out, was the only, in 1947, was the only nuclear weapons facility that stored nuclear bombs on Earth. It was the Roswell Army Air Base. And that was the sole place on Earth that had atomic weapons. And that's why there were those three craft that came in. But what happened is that, and we have an FBI memo to J. Edgar Hoover that explains this. That's in our archive, the Disclosure Project Intelligence Archive, which we've spent about $500,000 putting together in the last couple of years, and now everybody can see all this online. DPIarchive.com, if people are making notes, and you can put a link in there. But what happened is that this ended up having Roswell. We detonated through it was hidden in a radar array, an electromagnetic pulse or scalar type weapon that caused these craft to lose their guidance and propulsion systems. And two of them collided together, but there were three that ended up going down. Two were found right away. One was not found until the early 50s in a remote area of New Mexico going northwest in the mountains from Roswell. So we have all this documented, and I've debriefed firsthand witnesses back in the early 90s who worked that operation. But the reason for it, it wasn't just because, Roswell has become sort of cliche, like Area 51. But in reality, it was because, as were the nuclear weapons, the only ones on the planet, I should say atomic weapons, were stored. It was before we had nuclear, which are the thermonuclear weapons, which are much more dangerous, the hydrogen bombs. And so that's how that evolved. So the ETs became very concerned, but this caused a reaction by the national security state of, well, my God, these are here, and they're here trying to stop us from developing these weapons and slow down the pace, because the ETs were trying to slow down nuclear Armageddon, but our military and national security state wanted to go full speed ahead in the superpower competition with the Soviet Union. And of course, the rest is history, or if you know the history of that whole Cold War race with nuclear weapons, et cetera. Now, this combined at the same time with us going into space. Remember, in 1957, the Russians put Sputnik up, and then a little over a decade later, we put the first man on the moon. My uncle worked for Northrop Grumman his whole career and was on the team that helped design. He was an aerospace engineer. The lunar module, which was that funny-looking machine that took Neil Armstrong to the moon. So this whole history is not really known by the public or by our leaders, because it's been very clandestine and very secret. But really what it was about was a part of the arms race. So you had the nuclear arms race, you had the conventional weapons, you have the things that you hear about in the media. Then you had the covert arms race, which consists of downing and reverse engineering extraterrestrial vehicles and then trying to build copycat devices that look very similar and operate using so-called anti-gravity. It's actually gravity wave control and gravity control. And that's why most of the UFOs people see are, in fact, from Northrop Grumman, Lockheed Skunk Works, Raytheon, et cetera. They're not of extraterrestrial origin. I'd say maybe 10 or 20% of them are ET now. Most of the ones people see, and they have no idea that this is the case, are actually ours. And those have been used since the late 1950s in all manner of skullduggery. Things such as abductions, staged alien mutilations, psychological warfare operations, all manner of clandestine and criminal activity, including human trafficking, drug running, et cetera. So now this has all been turned over to federal law enforcement in the United States by my team. And we now have debriefed over 750 whistleblowers. And I'm turning over the top tier of those that are still living over to the investigatory committees in the House and the Senate, but also to the White House and to the people in law enforcement federally. So that's it in a nutshell. But the secrecy evolved mainly because we wanted to know how these things worked, and we didn't want anyone else to know how they worked. And once they discovered the technology behind them, they realized, well, we have to master this and be preeminent. But the organization that was doing that legally under Truman and in the early years of Eisenhower decided to subvert the rule of law and go outside the system. In other words, that organization and collective of what Eisenhower called military industrial complex folks working in this particular area of national security and science decided to subvert the Constitution here and elsewhere and create their own entity. And that is what happened. So there was basically a silent and unacknowledged coup d'etat that happened around 1956, 7, 8, when Eisenhower got betrayed by that group. And it has never been put right since. The current president and other presidents I've dealt with have had no control over that organization. We're hoping that comes to an end soon, because if it doesn't, the consequences are extremely dire.
In 1954, I think it was, that President Eisenhower, apparently he was out on a vacation. I know you already know the story I'm going to share, and from my understanding, it is confirmed. I'd be curious the level of confirmation of that,
Mhm.
that he left his vacation for a few days
Mhm.
to
Mhm.
commune with extraterrestrials
Mhm.
about information in regards to, I believe, something along the lines of nuclear information or something of the sort that we have for some type of space advanced technology from extraterrestrials. Is that a confirmed thing? I'm sure I'm misspeaking somehow. Can you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, it actually happened in 1956
Okay.
near Muroc, Muroc, California, which is where Edwards Air Force Base is now, at the high desert. And there was a meeting, I've had it confirmed from the Ministry of Defense in France, ironically, that had information on it because I was working with an admiral with the French Ministry of Defense about 15 years ago who sent over a report based on someone who was actually there.
Hmm.
That's in my archive somewhere. But the archive is terabytes and terabytes of stuff. I mean, it would take you 2 or 3 years to go through it in a cursory way. But and it's online, so available to anyone who wants to see it. Of course, nobody reads anymore, do they? So it's a kind of a moot point. Um, I say that only half jokingly. At any rate, I know I'm a tough professor, you know. But, so what happened was that this meeting was because in 1954, here's an important date. October 1954, we mastered what's called gravity control.
Hmm.
And we went from the nuclear era to being able to do some extraordinary things with space, time, and matter. So, believe it or not, in the 50s, we had the ability to teleport things. We had the ability to master gravity, so objects could basically go beyond the normal aerodynamic and propulsion systems to electromagnetic field propulsion. And that all happened. And of course, the ETs were very concerned because while they don't want to interfere or be at all aggressive, because they're not, they also knew that you had a bunch of sociopaths, and some of them were psychopaths, who had reverse engineered extraterrestrial technologies enough that they were able to then combine that and go out and increasingly be a threat in space. So before we landed on the moon, believe it or not, it's true, we went out with a covert man-made UFOs. Those are actually there's a artist's illustration of three of them that were in a hangar for a covert air show in 1988 at Norton Air Force Base in California. And we have someone who was there who gave full testimony about being there at that event. And the three that you see there in 88, were actually built in the late 50s, early 60s. Because inside the avionics, let's call it, were from the Mercury era, you know, the Mercury capsule. But they had been all through the solar system. They weren't interstellar. They weren't at that level, but they could go out and all around and had been out and back. So we have had man-made UFOs since the late 50s. So the ETs were very concerned that we were not only pushing from atomic weapons to thermonuclear ones when we detonated the first atomic bomb in 1952, but I mean, hydrogen bomb. They also knew that we were going very quickly, covertly, into these technologies that could eventually be a threat to other worlds and to other people. So now we escalated from being a threat to ourselves to being a threat to others, while also being sort of insane, you know, as a bunch of unstable primates. So you know, humans are a very dangerous species. And so, I mean, there are many beautiful things about humans, but there's this other end of it, right? If you doubt it, look at the human history and all the wars and what's going on right now. We're on the brink of another risk of nuclear war with Ukraine, Russia, and Europe and the United States. So this is looked at very there's a great deal of concern about this. So that existed in the 50s. And so there was an outreach, and the ETs did meet apparently with Eisenhower and some of his people, and they were suggesting, the ETs, that we stop the nuclear arms race, become peaceful as a people. And the new technologies that had been discovered would give us a world without oil, gas, coal. Poverty would be eliminated in 15 to 20 years. And Eisenhower was inclined to go along with that. The military industrialists, who are tied in the keyword corporate industrialists, didn't want that because it would terminate Standard Oil. It would, which is ExxonMobil, it was, the Standard Oil. It would terminate public utilities. It would terminate nuclear power. It would terminate solar and wind. It would terminate hydroelectric. Everything that runs the planet today that existed in the 50s would be redundant, obsolete, like a old Royal typewriter or a horse and buggy before the Model T. So I think that there was this really critical point where we made some very bad choices. Eisenhower was old and he was tired after having been a 5-star general in World War II. He trusted people who betrayed him. And the result was this military-industrial cabal ran with this, and he got blocked from controlling the projects. I know people who worked with him. They're now dead. But if you look at our witnesses and the testimony of Stephen Lubkin, who was a lawyer, but at the time was in the White House Signal Corps communications in the late 50s until Eisenhower left office, he said that Eisenhower had been pushed aside and didn't control the matter. Kennedy was the last president to make a serious effort to correct that, and that got him killed. 100%. We know this is why he was killed. Fact. It's not a speculation. But the issue then becomes, if you have a group of people with technologies that are way more advanced than a B-2 stealth bomber, and they pretty much run as their own entity, that organization between the late 50s and now you were talking, almost 70 years, it has immense power and corrupt power that trumps, no pun intended, that the power of the White House or Congress or any other country. So this is not a conspiracy theory, it's a fact. And the good news is there are members of Congress now and people in law enforcement at a federal level, very high, who now know that is the case, and they are trying to get it corrected.
Is the same, I have so many questions, is the same group or agency who assassinated Kennedy successfully, are they the same group or agency that attempted to assassinate Trump?
That I don't know. I had my own, when it happened, I actually saw it live. And I immediately
You were there for Kennedy?
No. When Trump was in Butler, when that happened, I had the TV on, saw it.
You'd have been very young for the Kennedy thing, but I guess you were around.
I was 8 years old.
Yeah, you were around. Yeah.
In 63, when that happened, I was 8. Yeah. Interestingly, it was about the same time I saw The Craft.
Interesting.
Yeah, that summer.
How does someone, this is a kind of a nickel question, I apologize, but I'm curious, how do extraterrestrials go about contacting the President of the United States?
I don't know what the logistics were that were set up. And for Eisenhower, to my knowledge, there has not been any serious attempt by a president since then to do that. We're working on that. It needs to happen. But it has to happen. Here's the problem. How do you do that safely now that we have technologies that target ET craft when they enter our dimension? So when they come out of, say, trans-dimensional space-time, we can get into this in a moment, and they become 3D, they are immediately detected, and they are immediately targeted, and they are often downed with these very high-powered quantum potential weapons that are faster than the speed of light, involving scalar and electromagnetic pulses. Now, I was just I've been out at a couple of bases where we have downed dozens of these ET craft. And I've had one of the senior operators take me in his chopper over the classified areas and have shown us the technologies that are used to down these craft. That information has been turned over to the White House and law enforcement, and also the Senate Intelligence and Armed Services and the House Oversight Committee, because I have the video and the photos of these facilities. And if you go to our archive, you'll see we have a map that shows where these bases are and where the underground openings are, because the really important assets are all underground, right? The really key assets are underground, and we know where those openings are for not all facilities, but for enough.
Is there 100% confirmation of humans downing extraterrestrial crafts or UFOs?
100%, yes. In fact, anybody wants to get it, we just released this. And this book has got dozens of cases with named, none of them are anonymous, named witnesses of the downing and retrieval of ET craft. The only ones that are not named are some of the new whistleblowers that do not want to be known publicly, that are been handed over to investigators at a federal level whose information is in there. And all of these cases are illustrated. There's the testimony and the synopsis. So what you have is on one page, you'll have, for example, an image. You'll have an image on one page, and then you'll have the text on the other. And the purpose of this was to have something that someone could flip through. You get a hardcover or paperback from our site. If you go to drstephengreer.com, you can find that. But those cases are rock solid. And so, yeah, it has been proven. Now, getting your hands on that equipment, now that's another matter. We are advising a strike team, the guys who've been special forces, who have separated from the military, who are preparing to go to these sites and retrieve these objects when they get the green light to do so. I have no official standing. I'm a private civilian, but I'm a private civilian who, I'll say this, is not very modest, knows way more about this subject than the President of the United States or the Congress ever will. They don't have time to go into that kind of depth. But I've agreed to advise and give all the information I have to these folks who seriously want to create a correction to this terrible problem that evolved from the 50s onward. And then also, eventually, we hope the technologies that can be safely released would give us a civilization without any poverty or pollution. Now, people, if you want to see a summary of that, a couple years ago, we released a documentary called The Lost Century, and you can see it on Amazon Prime and Tubi and all the sites. And it documents 100 years. That's what we call it, the lost century, of lost technology and human evolution because of the sequestration and suppression of these advanced technologies that would replace everything we're using, right? So imagine, if you had something that's the size of that book that would fit in a closet in your house, that would generate all the energy you needed for your home, not tied to the grid, and with zero pollution and zero cost. That is not a utopian pipe dream. Those technologies exist. So the question is, who's going to bring them out? And how do you do that without getting assassinated? Because I know many of the people who have had those technologies that I've gotten to know have been assassinated.
Is there confirmed technology that we are using today that comes from extraterrestrials? And what is the Secrecy Act of 1951? And how does that relate to today's experience?
Yeah, I was on Patrick David's podcast, and he's in Fort Lauderdale, where Billy Carson.
Yeah.
And he asked to talk about this. Here's what happened. About the time that we realized that these technologies would be disruptive to the status quo of the power elite, right? The real oligarchs that run the planet, way above the pay grade of a president or a Congress. Those corrupt enterprises ram through a number of provisions. one of which was the ability to seize and put national security orders on technologies they deemed of significance to the national security. Well, that's a term that you can be used for anything. You just don't want the public to know about. And, is it really in the public interest that we destroy the biosphere? Is it really in the public interest that 3 billion people on the planet don't even have energy to cook their food, so they're cutting down rainforests? No, it is not in the public interest. It's in the interest of the mega hundreds of trillions of dollars in assets that certain organizations control. We're not talking about billions here. We're talking about hundreds of trillions or quadrillions that are at stake. So when you start talking about that kind of asset value, let's say, and money and power and geopolitical power, now you're getting into some really difficult issues, extremely difficult. So those issues were a problem in the 50s and they're a problem in 2025. The issue is, are we going to fix this or not? If we don't fix it, we're going to head into an extinction level event for humans. And if we do fix it, it's like that Hopi prophecy rock. One line, it terminates, the other one goes on forever. We have a choice to make. Humans have a choice to make, and we better make it in the next 18 to 24 months.
I want to hear more about the 18, 24 months. Is there any confirmed technology that humans are using in their day-to-day lives that comes from extraterrestrials?
What we're using right now, integrated circuits, the silicon systems, fiber optics, absolutely, night vision. Those all came from reverse engineering ET material that were retrieved at these crash retrievals.
How do we know that for 100% confirmation?
Well, we have multiple whistleblowers, including Colonel Corso, who worked on some of that technology transfer effort. If you read his book, The Day After Roswell, he personally saw that some of this was handed over to corporate labs where they were studying this material. And by the way, that's a big source of funding for this covert group, is coming up with specialized material sciences and technologies that they do release through various corporate cutouts. But the really important technology has never been released, and that's the energy generation and propulsion technologies. Now, I think the propulsion technologies should not be released yet, because if they were, you could have any terrorist anywhere in the world reconfigure a rocket to fly with this technology, and you could get something from Mogadishu to downtown DC in about 3 minutes. So that is an obvious problem. Now the difference is that the energy generation systems that could sit on a table or in your closet or in the hood of your car would run your car, and you wouldn't be like a Tesla car. I call that a fake Tesla. A real Tesla would never be plugged into the coal-fired and gas-fired power grid.
Right.
All Tesla cars manufactured by the company called Tesla are actually a misdirect fake Tesla. Because in 1920, Nikola Tesla had a car with a little antenna on it, pulling this energy in, and had a little battery, and it was running around. And this is documented. It's in the Lost Century. It's also in our archive, a picture of it. And what he had, but J.P. Morgan told Nikola Tesla, if I can't put a meter on it, it ain't going to come out. Forget it. So that's why we call this the Lost Century. There's a century of lost human evolution and development because of the industrial oligarchs for 100 years have not wanted this science out. Now, people say, well, wouldn't that make a big industry? I said, yeah, it would. And it would be a tide that would lift all ships all over the world. And, Africa, developing countries that are very impoverished, that don't even have electric grids, wouldn't need an electric grid. It's like the cell phone bypassing, linear phone lines. This would be like power plants at each village or each town. But the issue is that means that within a 15-year period, we would never need oil or centralized utilities or power companies. And look at the financial market cap of all of that.
Yeah,
it's in the hundreds of trillions or quadrillions of dollars. So what has happened is that the mistake made 100 years ago has gotten compounded and compounded. And then in the modern era, where we then reverse engineered ET technology, they allowed out things that they could monetize. right? That are okay to release, but they kept secret the things that would actually give us a sustainable and I think peaceful civilization. But the longer you wait, it's like your house is leaking, right? With the roof leak, and you ignore it. And year after year, you ignore it till eventually the damn thing falls in. So we have ignored this problem and kicked the can down the road for 100 years. And look at what the costs are. 8 billion people living with the same technology, essentially, that we had in the late 1800s for energy, oil, gas, coal, blah, blah, blah. The only thing new was nuclear. You know, it was the mid 40s. So, okay, I'll give you 80 years. So we're all using 80 to 100-year-old technology. You know, windmills were predated the modern era. Solar, I have the biggest solar farm by law I can have in Virginia. It won't run this house I'm in. I mean, it's a joke. It's never going to run 8 billion people's energy needs. These new, what are called 0 point or quantum vacuum technologies would run the world with no pollution at zero cost. And I can tell you there's a chairman of a Fortune 50 company who's reached out to me, former chairman, who has the documents of this and wants to come forward. But as soon as he reached out to me, he had someone bump him, you know, came up to him and said, you know, your children and grandchildren are in play here. We can kill all of them. You know, they fly around on private jets. We'll just take the jet down. So it's a big problem. You know, I mean, if you actually have the goods, let's call it. So this is another thing that has to get resolved. But until you disclose what's behind a UFO or UAP is just a catch-all term. By the way, this is definitional. There are three things that are actually UAPs or UFOs. The man-made ones, the extraterrestrial ones, and the misidentification of extra-dimensional or interdimensional beings that are not from other star systems, right? Which had nothing to do with ETs at all.
I can see that.
Yeah.
I want to get into that as well. Where on Earth is the highest concentration of extraterrestrial evidence or life and UFOs? Is Area 51 the place for this? Where is the highest concentration of this stuff?
Well, your question was talking about actual ETs. That's not there. But in terms of the evidence, no, the Area 51 is nowhere near as important as the Lockheed Skunk Works facilities and the remote sites out in the desert, the Dugway Proving Grounds. There's half a dozen places more important than Area 51. Moreover, Area 51 is not that important. The area north of there, going into Groom Lake, Area 52, 54, Area 51 is just a grid on a map. By the way. So it's become this cliche. It's an old area, old facility, but the state-of-the-art ones are not there. There are some key places north of there in what was called the Nevada Test Range, where we detonated the hydrogen bombs when we were testing, atmospheric testing. And we know where those places are, and we know what's kept there and what's operational. Same thing with the areas that are out in the high desert, in the Mojave Desert out near Edwards Air Force, what we call the Edwards Complex, which is in our map, and a description of all of these facilities are in our archive.
Where's the archive? Where can people go to the archive? I know there's a URL for that.
Yeah, dpiarchive.com.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, my assistant can give you all the links, or should have already.
Yeah.
And the other thing we're doing a new documentary that we're crowdfunding, if people can help support it. We have an $800,000 goal, and we're going to release a documentary that we hope this fall. That will be an update of all of this. It's going to be the ultimate disclosure documentary that we're working on right now.
Amazing.
Mm-hmm.
What would be the most surprising, history shifting discoveries that could be found in some of these undisclosed locations?
Well, they're not undisclosed anymore, at least anyone who wants to look at our material, but they're unacknowledged.
Yeah.
By the way, that's people should look at the documentary Unacknowledged, which we released a few years ago. Bill Clinton was once being asked about all this with some celebrities, and he was in a limousine with a couple guys I know. And he said, well, if you want to know about this, I really was never to get to the bottom of it. Look at this documentary called Unacknowledged. Now, Unacknowledged, I named that documentary after the first word in Unacknowledged Special Access Project, or USAP. And those are the top secret programs that are not acknowledged, that are black. And then there's an illegal category of those that deal with UFOs. There are illegal unacknowledged projects that the president and the Congress Gang of Eight know about. And I don't disclose those. If they're legally, here's my criteria. The reason they can't do anything to arrest me is I only disclose unconstitutional illegal projects. I do not disclose ones that are constitutionally overseen and managed. Big difference. Now that's the policy I've had since I first briefed President Clinton's CIA director in 1993 after he was elected, the first year of his term. I was flown up as a young doctor from North Carolina to brief the sitting CIA director, which was a terrible experience, actually. But people don't realize that there are two categories of black projects. They're the ones that are legal, but a very, very small number of people know about them, including the presidents and the top national security tier people in the Congress. And then there are these illegal ones. And there's the illegal ones that are involving UAPs, UFOs, the technologies, all the criminal activity. And basically, they constitute the biggest RICO in the world, racketeering influence corrupt organization. So I've recommended for decades that they use the RICO laws that were passed in 1970 to take down the mafia, to take down this criminal organization, which that is now being taken very seriously at last, 30 years later.
Is there anything, what would be the most shocking thing that you could disclose in this conversation? And is there anything that is like, quote unquote, breaking news or news soon to break or something that is coming down the pipeline that you have encountered?
Yeah, I think the biggest shock that most people don't realize is, let me just tell you, it's apocryphal, but it's an important story. A man on our team named James Goodall is a very famous aerospace historian. And the week that the head of the Lockheed Skunk Works was dying, is his last week before he died of cancer in 1995, Mr. Goodall called Ben Rich, and asked about this whole issue. And I have a letter from Ben Rich to a friend that saying that there were both man-made and extraterrestrial UFOs in his handwriting on the stationery for the president of the Lockheed Skunk Works. That is in our archive. Everything's in there, my friend. Nobody reads, but it's not my fault people don't read. So I've spent 35 years and $20-30 million to put this together. If people don't want to look at it, it's not my fault. People say, where's the evidence? It's right there. Can you read English or whatever? So anyway, I get very frustrated with that. But after putting this much effort and had 4 people on my team assassinated, and I've had 3 assassination attempts, and people don't even want to read. It's like, well, if you're so lazy and stupid, you don't want to read, it's not my fault. Anyway, I won't go on a spiraling rant about that anymore. But I have disclosure PTSD from doing this. At any rate, I will admit it. But the Ben Rich story is amazing because he said, look, anything you can imagine. So go look at he said, look at anything you've seen in Star Trek, we've already done at the Lockheed Skunk Works. And it's not at Area 51. It's out in the desert. And we know where those sites are. So, and this was 30 years ago, almost exactly 30 years ago. So the technologies are way beyond what most people can imagine that humans have. Unfortunately, some of the worst psychopathic and sociopathic criminals to ever walk the earth are in possession of them, which is very dangerous. It's dangerous to us. It's dangerous to the ETs. That
Who are these criminals specifically?
Well, I don't want to name. I mean, I can name some names. There are people who historically have been involved with this, such as Admiral Bobby Ray Inman and Dick Cheney and others. I mean, we know who some are. We know some that are living, some that are dead, and we know who are currently operatives. So most of the people you see in the UFO subculture, or a certain number of them, are also operatives for this organization that spread disinformation and false information. And that's their job. I mean, they appear to be UFO researchers, and they're actually counterintelligence people. And we know who they are, and people have been duly notified. There are a couple of them who are very prominent that are on the list of folks to be interrogated and quite possibly arrested for treason. But that's another discussion. But I think the other thing that's really astonishing, you know, in 1992, I first started this project to do CE5 contact. I wasn't involved in any of this disclosure stuff. I founded the whole modern disclosure movement in the mid and late 90s after I found out this cabal had submarined the president and all this. But my real passion is making contact and developing higher states of consciousness for people, and starting a civilization that goes into that beautiful future instead of this dystopian situation we're in now. And so, but in 1992, I had a group of people, sort of like what we're doing in Arizona in September. But it was a smaller group. It was maybe 50 or 60 people on a beach near Pensacola. And we were doing CE5 contact, and 4 ET craft appear. Well, one of them gets photographed and is on the front page of the Pensacola paper the next day. And shortly thereafter, the head of Army intelligence contacts me and asks for a meeting the following month, April of 92. And it was very threatening. And he said, "What the hell do you think you're doing?" I said, "Well," and he said, "You've discovered the Rosetta Stone of ET contact, because all ET communication systems interface with consciousness and directed thought, like a laser, right? That's what I discovered when I was a kid, when I was 18. So, and then I set it up, this whole system, the whole CE5 contact app, which, people like Aaron Rodgers, he has that and has practiced that. That creates the ability to make contact. And he didn't want that. The General Stubblebine, his name was General Albert Stubblebine III. And then the following month, after he expressed his displeasure, he had a CIA and a National Security Agency guy there with him when he met with me. He offered me the following month $2 billion if I would stop what I was doing and join his little clique of goose-stepping fascists. And I said, "No, thanks. I'm not interested." But it was a serious offer of $2 billion. And that was in $1992. And he had access to that. That's a rounding error for that organization. They deal with trillions of dollars in clandestine money, way more than the federal defense budget. So I said, "Look, I am not going to get off the path I'm on for no amount of threat and no amount of money." But that is how that whole started. And that's at the same time, there were what I call the white hats, the people who were in intelligence and military who wanted to see this subject resolved, right? That has grown and grown and grown. So I started out with, half a dozen whistleblowers. Now we have 750 some whistleblowers. And so it's snowballed over the last 33 years. So, but one of the things I learned in a couple years ago was that there is an operation, and this is why he wanted me to become part of his team, General Stubblebine, where they've taken the science of consciousness and weaponized it. So what they've done is that they have what are called psionic or P3 operators that will basically they are become instruments of their controllers, humans that then use these people who have been trained using drugs and various electronics to be able to, in consciousness, lock on to the guidance systems of an ET craft and kind of lure it or bring it over an area and then hit it with an electromagnetic and scalar weapon. Now, I have been at 2 facilities where that's being done actively. And so this sounds like science fiction. It isn't. It's a horrific use of very advanced technologies that are interfaces between electromagnetics and consciousness and thought. And that is the new frontier in science, right? Is the science of consciousness. And but I think that General Stubblebine knew that I had mastered that because of my meditation and near-death experience. But I also understand the physics of it because I'm a medical doctor. And so he was offering me all this money to be part of this nasty little bit of business. I didn't know until a couple of years ago the extent to which that had been developed as a technology for killing ET craft and killing their occupants. So it's a monstrous program. And most of the people who are in training to become P3 operators end up in permanent comas or die. But the ones that survive, quite a few of them are quite adept at doing this. I call it cosmic hijacking, using these advanced physics and consciousness and electromagnetic interface. So, people ask, how do you levitate something? How does Uri Geller bend a spoon? Well, there's an interface between consciousness, thought, and space, time, and matter that's very well understood in certain physics circles, right? When you start dealing with interstellar, right, civilizations, they utilize what we would consider magical powers, the way you and I flip on a light switch or turn on this cell phone. But I always tell people, take a step back. About 20 minutes from my house here in the Blue Ridge Mountains is Thomas Jefferson's home, Monticello, at University of Virginia. And if you were to take this cell phone and show it to Thomas Jefferson 200 years ago, if you were in Salem, Massachusetts, you'd be burned at the stake as a witch.
Sure.
Right? So now extrapolate several hundred to several million years technologically beyond where we are. That's what you're dealing with. So this is why Ben Rich, and this is 30 years ago, said anything you can imagine, we've already done. Because once you cross that threshold of non-locality, entanglement, quantum entanglement, where every point in space and time is interconnected, but you can do it scientifically, right? It opens up a whole constellation of capabilities. Now, those could be used to heal people. They could be used to cure every disease we know. I know this. It could be used to heal the biosphere, end poverty in the world, and create an enlightened and sustainable civilization for hundreds of thousands of years. But it can be used as a weapon. And so this gets into this whole philosophical, almost, some would say theological discussion of free will. We're a planet of free will. So humans made in the image of God, what that means is we have that ability to have God consciousness and enlightenment, but we also have free will. And we can use it for the good or for the ill, right? And that is the choice. I tell people right now, we're in a big thing I call the choice. What are we humans going to collectively choose in the next coming months and years? Are we going to choose Armageddon? Or are we going to choose an age of enlightenment? It's in our hands. The ETs are watching this, hoping they do not have to intervene. The only way they intervene are a couple of situations. One that we're getting very close to, and that is where humans become an existential threat to other worlds, where our technological capability can target and threaten other worlds that are peaceful. Number two is when we blow the system here, environmentally or through nuclear war, and we're in a complete meltdown, then there would be a massive extraterrestrial intervention. But those are the worst case scenarios. We do not want that to happen. What we need to do is transform the situation, take all these extraordinary high-tech swords that are in these covert programs and turn them into plowshares to create a beautiful civilization on Earth, and then make open contact with the ETs officially. And actually, I had a lucid dream about 50 years ago, or maybe, yeah, where I saw that. And there was actually out, it looked like White Sands, ironically, where the first atomic bomb was detonated. And the United States government and people around the world and the military had accepted this and decided to move off the path of conflict and to make open, peaceful contact. And in a blue sky, a beautiful egg-shaped, not very big, ET craft descended, and out of it came an ET elder, and it was televised globally. Now, when I had the dream, I was maybe 20 years old, and I knew I was older, and I knew it was in the future, and I saw a lot of technology that exists now that didn't exist then. So I'm hopeful that we choose that vision that has to guide things, and not the vision of just endless war in space. Now, the people who are spinning the subject, remember, the predominant paradigm on the subject is all CIA crafted psychological warfare information. Abductions, mutilation, good aliens, bad aliens, cowboys and Indians in space. It's all a bunch of nonsense. So I would say I'm the biggest skeptic you'll ever meet about 99% of everything dealing with UFOs. Because in my early days of this, I had people who came to me who were operational on teams that were conducting the abductions using man-made UFOs and electronic warfare systems and chemicals and whatnot. And so, I mean, I think that what passes as what most people think is the real UFO ET story is a false mythology created by a very compartmented operation at the agency, CIA.
Are there ETs walking among humans today?
Oh, well, some people claim that. I think what happens more likely is that they may appear and disappear for select instances, but I don't think they're just like living amongst us and going to the mall buying, frozen yogurt for dessert, or whatever. I mean, that's, a lot of people say that. What I've experienced is that they can appear, and they can appear in a very similar human form and be around for a period of time. But I don't think they're just, now, are there ETs living in the earth and under the water? Yes. But most of the time, when the covert programs linked to these clandestine military and corporate operations detect that, they go and destroy those facilities.
How do you know there's ETs living in the earth or in the ocean or places of this sort? How do you confirm that?
By people who have actually targeted them or been present when they've, emerged. And then, we know a number of places where this has happened. I wonder if some of what's being found in South America is an activation of some of that, because you look at this boogosphere that recently came out that I took a member of Congress to look at this spherical object. There's going to be a whole part of this new documentary about this. And it's about this big and weighs 10.1 kilos. But when it landed the first time, it only weighed 2 kilos. So it changed its mass, everything. We're doing some scientific studies on it to figure out if the material and metal is of Earth or extraterrestrial origin. And we're also going to try to get some carbon-14 dating on it. But those tests are pending. We haven't gotten those done yet. But I do think it's most likely not human. But it's old. It's very ancient. And so there are some accounts of people seeing ETs that are in certain areas down in South America and other places that emerge, and also under the water. We know that off of Guam, where the Marianas Trench is, we have a Coast Guard whistleblower who apparently one of the craft coming out of that deep area of the ocean was targeted and was downed. And they lost track of it, and it was caught in a fishing net of a Japanese trawler, And this particular whistleblower, his testimony's in our archive also, was there when they retrieved it, and he was one of the few people who actually touched and handled the thing. And the surface is so hard, even with a piece of metal, or he couldn't scratch it, nothing. They're extremely exotic materials that these craft are made out of. So, and there's been many reports of certain areas of the ocean where they emerge and come in and out. Now, the big problem now is because our technology from the Lockheed Skunk Works and Raytheon and Northrop Grumman, they're so advanced that even the people I know on retrieval teams say you can scarcely tell the difference between a man-made one and an ET one, because we have 80 years, right, of scientific development and reverse engineering involving, I will say, the smartest scientists I have ever met are the scientists working in that area. They're not at Harvard or MIT, I can assure you. And they are working in these programs. They get plucked out of high school and college. And they also have spent, we estimate, between 8 and 12 trillion dollars over the decades doing this, most of it embezzled black budget funding. So that's another area of criminal investigation, is the embezzlement of vast sums of the Treasury into these covert programs, and that is being looked at.
Do you believe that as human consciousness evolves and shifts, we will open ourselves up or close ourselves down to extraterrestrial, multidimensional beings?
Well, I think it's happening now. I mean, we have now, we have millions of people who've been doing CE5 contact. We get reports from all over the world from people doing it. Mm-hmm. I think that what we're trying to do, and this is why what we're doing in September is important. If you create a mass contact event, it doesn't matter what you see. In the conscious field, it affects everyone on the planet.
Yeah.
This thing that's called the Maharishi effect, where a certain percentage of people are meditating, and it creates this field coherence amongst people that you don't even know you're there. It has this effect, and this is because of quantum entanglement in the conscious field, which is very well documented, by the way, in various scientific studies, such as random number generators at Princeton by Dr. Bob John, who I'd gotten to know before he died, where he would just have people put their awareness on a random number generator, a quantum generator, spitting out ones and zeros. And if they put their awareness on it and intended it to put out more ones, it would. But if two people loved each other, or two people were united and were coherent, it was a tenfold increase. It was exponential, not arithmetic. Wow. It wasn't 1 and 1 is 2. It was tenfold. So there is this power of humans coming together in that state of consciousness. And this is what excites me the most. And that's why I tell people I have to do all this stuff. I've moved into an orbit that's very disturbing personally for me, with military and clandestine operations and spooks and politicians and God knows what all, which is the least favorite thing I have to do. What I love the most is doing the work with CE5 contact and teaching people meditation and higher states of consciousness and how to apply that to a peaceful relationship. So I think that movement is going right now. Yeah. The question is, does it become something that becomes acknowledged by the whole world? It is getting acknowledged by some of the whistleblowers. I mean, there's one that came out recently, Jake Barber, who acknowledged that the foundation of all of this is in this science of consciousness. Although his operations were as a retrieval and transport specialist out at these black sites where they were downing the craft using P3 operators.
I think popularity of podcasts like this and conversations like this are an example of it. And I'm personally experiencing that, where it seems like, the algorithm goes towards conversations, towards things like this. People are interested. And it makes me question and wonder if perhaps all of this information, in the I think maybe it was 80s, you probably know when it was, there was the CIA was conducting a thing called the Gateway Process, I believe, where they were studying and observing altered states of consciousness using a particular type of frequency. It's kind of like binaural beats.
Mhm.
Essentially, the concept was that the world is a hologram, and you can access all of the information, and you can remote
Correct.
view, and you can do all these things
Correct.
through your consciousness.
Right.
And it makes me question and be curious if perhaps all of this is happening
Mhm.
presently, now and
Mhm.
forever, and in the past and the future, and it's just a matter of us
Mhm.
tuning into whatever it is that we tune into. But it's always there,
It's always there.
and collectively consciousness kind of moves, and it
Mhm.
has a certain level of inertia,
Mhm.
and then things start to open up, and things maybe get a little funny, a little wild for a while. But it's
Mhm.
actually this manifestation or creation of the
Mhm.
zeitgeist of consciousness that is humanity.
Right. And it is because, all of reality is a conscious quantum hologram, meaning that every point is connected to every other, not just materially, but in all dimensions. And the ultimate singularity is actually the pure consciousness
Correct.
field consciousness. And what I tell people is that you're awake right now, I'm awake, and we're two unique individuals. And no two individuals are alike, not even identical twins. However, the consciousness itself, not what we're conscious of, but the consciousness itself is an infinite and eternal, because it's infinite because it's not bound by space, and it's eternal because it goes beyond time. So this is where, when you understand the nature, and this is why the meditative state is so important, and you go into a deep state of quiet meditation, you can connect to that field consciousness and see remote places, but also remote times.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I met my wife in a series of lucid dreams when I was 22, and I was introduced to her in the lucid dream state. So almost everything important I see in it before it happens in a lucid dream state. It's strange. In the ER, I used to see things.
Sure.
I'd be in the call room, and I'd be just sort of meditating or hitting a gadget state, and I would see a critical congestive heart failure case come in, and I'd get up and tell the nurses, "We're going to have this, blah blah," and they go, "There's nothing that they've not called." I said, "Well, they're going to," and they go, "How do you know?" I said, Felt it, saw it,"
Yeah.
and then there would be, and of course, this is in North Carolina. These nurses were awesome. They call me a warlock, but but I tell people that, once you develop that faculty,
Yeah.
and you can put it into daily use. So I think in the future, once people understand that the entirety of the cosmos is folded within each of us through consciousness, the gateway is actually this state of quiet consciousness, is a gateway to any point in space, time, anywhere. And once you realize that, everything is possible. And it isn't hard even to experience it. This is actually what we're doing with the CE5 contact, is teaching people that is foundational, and then applying it to contacting these civilizations, because we know that they are at that level of understanding, but their technologies are at that level. Even if I don't possess a consciousness, machine interface communication device, the ETs have that, and that's what they use. And they pick up a clear, coherent thought or a guidance, like inviting them to your location, as clearly as we would have our GPS on our car guide us to where we're going for dinner.
Hmm.
So that is a technology that is fundamental and basic, really, to any interstellar civilization.
Hmm.
They are not, think about it for a minute. There's no way you're going to use what you and I are talking on right here, because this is happening at the speed of light, 186,000 miles per second. But if you're from the Andromeda galaxy, which is 2.5 million years from here, and one of the ETs we've had contact with is from Andromeda, we have a photograph of him. That is at the speed of light, 2.5 million years to say hello, and another 2.5 million years for the person to say, "How are you doing today?" It's 5 million years. So we know that you're not dealing with civilization using, Ma Bell radio frequencies, right? So I always tell people, you got to step out of your own little narrow world of this sort of ethnocentric time we're in right now, and realize there's a big cosmos out there, and the technologies just keep going forever.
Hmm.
And the big action of the future, I think the next 1,000 years on Earth, the big sciences are going to all be related to the science of consciousness
I
and
agree.
its applications. That's
Yeah.
the big that's the big wave. And part of that will be extraterrestrial in realization, because those civilizations have come this way before us, or they couldn't have gotten here. And they understand this. I mean, they understand what I'm talking about here as well as you and I talk about how to turn on our phones and call somebody.
Hmm.
That's what I think.
Man, I really enjoyed this conversation. I appreciate you allowing the build up to of the material into the kind of metaphysical aspects. I've heard you say that we have had preparation for a staged extraterrestrial UFO attack for the last 60 odd years.
Yep.
Is that true? How do we confirm that? And why would the government, if it would be a government thing, do that in the first place?
Well, the government of the United States wouldn't. The secret government would. And people conflate the two. This is basic to understanding this. There are two governments. There's a transnational entity that is way above technologically and in power the government we elect and appoint. So that's who would do it. Well, number one. Number two, they've had that capability for decades and have actually been doing it in a preparatory, the psychological warfare operations, Hollywood, the media, most podcasts. I had been on Joe Rogan. For him to get his $100 million from Spotify, he had to take my interview out because I said more than those powers wanted to know. The only people on this subject matter he has on his show are people who know very little or are disinformation operatives, full stop. So I'm going to take the gloves off here. So what has happened is that there is a lock on major media and major internet podcasts to only push a false agenda and a false information. The punchline of that is it's mostly information that posits the whole cowboys and Indians and space thing. And that, as Werner von Braun, who invented the rocket cradle of Hitler, warned on his deathbed from his assistant, who's on our team, Carol Rosin, told us this, that they were planning to hoax an alien attack. But to do that, they had to prepare people with all this psychological warfare disinformation. So they started hoaxing ET contact events that people generally call abductions and mutilations and things like this. And those are CIA psychological warfare operations. And we know this to be a fact because we have whistleblowers and documents of and people who have confirmed it. So this is another problem. Most of ufology, if there is such a thing, I don't think there is myth, fiction, and counterintelligence disinformation. So, picking your way through that was my biggest challenge when I first started getting involved with this. And it's most people's challenge because the dominant information. So let's just say that foundation's already been laid, right? The only question is, will they pull the trigger on an event where it looks like an attack? They certainly can. This is one of the reasons why I'm advising this strike team to get stood up as soon as possible and defang that monster, basically neutralize that capability. But it would be have to be a global operation to defang it. And that's what we're recommending to key national security and law enforcement people. Luckily, it's now being taken very seriously. Believe it or not, what I just told you is, and I can't say more than that, but I will tell you that I'm in virtually daily communication with people at that level. And that is going forward. And I think there are some big surprises coming up. It needs to get resolved in the next 6 to 18, maybe 24 months. Because if it doesn't, I think these dystopian agendas are going to unfold. The matter is going to get disclosed. The question is it going to be disclosed in a way that leads to a future that's peaceful and abundant and enlightened, or a future that's catastrophic? And I think this is really a stark choice that we have to make. And I would suggest people move heaven and earth right now to make the former happen, a time of universal peace. My motto for the organization is one universe, one people, moving towards an era of universal peace. And the foundation of us being a unified people on Earth and in space is understanding the singularity of consciousness. So that's foundational to everything that we're doing, in my opinion.
Do you believe we will make open contact with extraterrestrials in the next when? If you had to pick a date, a time frame.
Well, or our organization already has. And you
Like
can see.
openly, this is something where it's like, oh yeah, of course, ETs. Like, duh, it's a part of life.
Yeah, I think it's going to happen in the next couple of years. Yeah, I do. And I hope it happens within the framework of the vision I shared of something very peaceful and unifying and not something terrifying, right? We need to close out this era of endless war and open an era of endless universal peace. And actually, there's only one survivable future for humans, and that's a peaceful one. Because when you understand what these technologies are capable of that are way far beyond nuclear, you can't have a world within the consciousness of hate and division. It has to be a unified, but not a unified superficially, but at a deep level. I would almost say that it's, without saying it's not religious, but it's deeply spiritual realization that has to happen.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's great, good meeting you.
I really enjoyed this conversation. Right. So if people want to go deeper into your work, what is the best places to point people?
Well, you can go to drstephengreer.com. If you want to go through the archive and have the patience to go through a vast amount of information, it's dpiarchive.com. And then I have all my social media. I have a YouTube channel with several hundred videos. And I think people wanting to learn about consciousness and how to remote view and make contact should get the CE5 Contact app. That's what it's called, CE5 Contact. Awesome. And you can get it on any of the app stores.
Awesome. Cool. Thank you.
Alrighty. Thank you.
I appreciate you. Thank you all for tuning in. That is it. That is all. I'll see you next week. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed that episode, you might also enjoy this episode over here, as well as this one over here. Thank you for subscribing. Appreciate you. I'll see you in the next video.